One summer day, a girl named Alice was reading a historical book about ancient kings with her sister. But Alice was bored. She made a daisy flower crown for her little cat Dinah, using the beautiful chamomile flowers she had found. She thought to herself, "The weather is so nice today that I don't feel like reading a history book." Alice softly said to her cat, "If I had my own world, no one would be forced to go to school. Everything there would be strange and fun." As Alice continued to daydream and think about her wonderful world, suddenly she saw a white rabbit in elegant clothes run past her. Alice immediately jumped up and ran after the rabbit. She said to her cat, "Dinah, look, how hurried that rabbit is. He must be going somewhere important, maybe to a big party." They followed the white rabbit until they finally reached a large hole in the ground. Although the rabbit hole was a bit narrow, Alice squeezed herself and managed to get inside. She wanted to see where the rabbit was going. Alice didn't know that sometimes too much curiosity can cause trouble, but she didn't think about that. And suddenly, Alice cried out, "Oh no!" and everything went dark. She had fallen into a deep, dark hole, and the sound of her scream echoed all around. A little later, Alice realized she was no longer in the rabbit hole. It felt as if she was slowly drifting downward through a bright, strange tunnel filled with floating objects all around her. At last, she landed in a hallway. When she lifted her head, she saw the white rabbit hurriedly running to the end of the hallway and disappearing. Alice shouted loudly, "Mr. Rabbit, please wait," and ran down the hallway as fast as she could. But the white rabbit passed through a door and slammed it shut behind him. Alice quickly opened the door and went after the rabbit. But with every door she passed through, it was smaller than the one before. The doors became smaller and smaller in sequence. Alice said in surprise, "Everything here is getting stranger by the moment." Alice reached the smallest door. When she tried to turn the doorknob, something strange suddenly happened. She saw that the doorknob had a big nose. She said to herself, "What a very strange and peculiar place." She spoke to the doorknob, which now looked like a face. "Can I go through this door?" The doorknob replied, "I'm sorry, dear girl. You are too big. You cannot get through here." Alice asked, "Then what should I do?" The doorknob said, "Try that bottle on the table. It says, 'Drink me.'" Alice saw a glass bottle on the table. When she drank a little from it, something strange happened. Every time she drank, she became smaller. Alice was happy that she could fit through the door, but when she tried to turn the doorknob, she realized it was locked. Little Alice couldn't open the door. Suddenly, she found a magical cookie that said, "Eat me." When she took a bite of the cookie, she suddenly began to grow. She grew so tall that her head hit the ceiling. Now she was far too big to fit through the small door. Giant Alice began to cry from frustration. Her huge tears poured onto the ground like a waterfall, gradually filling everything with water. Then she drank from the same bottle again to shrink back down. This time, she became so small that she fell inside the empty bottle. The bottle floated like a tiny boat on her tear-filled waters and passed through the keyhole of the door. When Alice emerged on the other side of the door, she was amazed to find herself in the middle of a vast ocean. Suddenly, she saw a strange bird floating beside her, singing and dancing on the water. Alice shouted, "Hey, hey, please help me." But the bird seemed not to understand what she was saying. A big wave carried Alice to the shore. When she lifted her head, she saw a funny sight. Fish, birds, and other creatures had gathered around the strange bird named Dodo. They were all wet and spinning around to dry themselves. But every time they spun around, the ocean waves splashed them and got them wet again. At that moment, Alice saw the white rabbit again and shouted, "Mr. Rabbit, wait!" Alice ran after the white rabbit until she reached a large forest. Suddenly, two twin brothers appeared in her path. The first one said, "I am Twiddlum." Alice said, "I'm following the white rabbit." and I'm very curious to know where he's going." Tweedledum shook his head and said, "Oh dear, curiosity always causes trouble. Even the little shells were curious. Do you know what happened to them?" Then, the two twin brothers began telling the story of the walrus and the carpenter. Alice sat on a tree trunk and listened carefully. They said, one day, a walrus with big whiskers and a carpenter wearing an old hat decided to take a walk by the sea. The carpenter, who was looking at the sea, suddenly saw a few little shells in the water. He showed them to the walrus, and the walrus hatched a plan. He wanted to trick the little shells. He intended to invite them to walk with him on the sandy shore. But the poor little shells had no idea what the walrus was plotting. The walrus began whistling a beautiful tune. The little shells, hearing this lovely sound, grew curious and came out of the sea to see who was playing such a beautiful song. But when the little shells reached the walrus, he ate them all. Not a single one was left. When the story ended, Alice said, "That was so sad, poor little shells." Even though Tweedledum had warned her, she was still curious about where the White Rabbit was going. Alice said goodbye to the twins and ran out of the forest. After running for a while, she suddenly reached a small, charming cottage that was pink and white, like delicious candies. At that very moment, the door of the cottage opened and the White Rabbit jumped out. The rabbit shouted, "Oh no, I'm late, I'm so late." Then, seeing Alice, he commanded her, "Hurry, go inside the house and bring me my gloves." Alice entered the cottage. On the table, there was a plate full of delicious cookies, each with a label that read, "Eat me." Alice happily ate the cookies. They were very delicious, but suddenly, she felt herself growing. Yes, she grew bigger and bigger. Alice grew so big that her arms and legs stretched out beyond the small White Rabbit's house. The White Rabbit was frightened and shouted, "Oh no, a monster!" Then he hurried off to call his friend Dodo. Dodo came up with a strange idea and said, "Let's set the house on fire." Alice ate a carrot from the rabbit's garden and suddenly became very small again. When Dodo asked the rabbit for a match, the White Rabbit hurried off once again. Panting, Alice said, "Oh no, now that I've become so small, I'll never be able to catch up with the rabbit." Alice ran out of the garden and reached a place full of beautiful flowers that could talk and sing. But when the flowers saw Alice, they thought she was a weed. They didn't like her and angrily chased her out of the flower bed. After that, Alice saw a curious caterpillar sitting on a large mushroom, smoking a hookah. The caterpillar asked, "Who are you?" Alice tried to answer, but when she opened her mouth, she coughed on the hookah smoke, and a strong gust of air burst out from her mouth. And the blast of air caused the caterpillar's clothes to fly off. Suddenly, something strange happened. The caterpillar transformed into a large butterfly and began flapping its wings. The butterfly said to Alice, "If you eat from one side of this mushroom, you will grow taller. If you eat from the other side of the mushroom, you will grow shorter." Then it flew away. Alice carefully broke off 2 small pieces of the strange mushroom, holding one piece in her right hand and the other in her left. She thought to herself, "I don't know which piece will make me grow and which will make me shrink." Then she shrugged and took a bite of one of the mushroom pieces, and suddenly she began to grow. Alice grew so tall that her head poked out above the tree branches. She realized she needed to eat the other piece of the mushroom as well, and carefully took a few small bites from the second piece, beginning to shrink. But now she had become very small, so she ate a little more from the first piece again. Alice took bites from both pieces of the mushroom several times, growing bigger and smaller alternately, until finally she returned to her proper natural size. Alice carefully put the remaining pieces of the mushroom into her shirt pocket and set off again to find the White Rabbit. She came across a few signs and boards in the forest, but they didn't help her. As she stood there confused, wondering which way to go, suddenly she heard someone singing. Alice looked up and saw something strange, a large mouth with a wide smile floating in the air, looking at her. Then, gradually, the rest of the body appeared, and Alice saw that it was a striped Cheshire cat with a fluffy tail. This cat could disappear and reappear at will. The cat said, "If you really want to know where the white rabbit has gone," it pointed with its paw in a direction and continued, "He went that way." Alice continued on her way, and a little later she heard singing again. This time, the voice was louder and happier. As she got closer, she saw two people sitting around a table. They were the Mad Hatter and the March Hare, having a tea party and celebrating an unbirthday. Alice wanted to sit beside them, but both shouted, "No room, no room." Suddenly, the Mad Hatter looked at Alice. He took off his tall, strange hat and said to her, "Happy unbirthday." Alice was surprised to see an unbirthday cake with a lit candle placed on his head. He said to Alice, "Now blow out the candle and make a wish." Just as if Alice's wish had come true, suddenly the White Rabbit arrived. He was running hurriedly, glancing at his pocket watch and saying, "I'm late. I'm so late." The Mad Hatter and the March Hare looked at the rabbit's watch and said that it was broken. They decided to fix it using jam and lemon juice. Alice was now tired of all the strange and nonsensical things and wanted to return home. She saw a narrow path that seemed to lead out of the forest. She decided to follow it, but suddenly a strange creature appeared, half dog and half broom, and began sweeping the path. With each sweep, a part of the path disappeared. Alice sat on a large rock and began to cry. She shouted aloud, "I'll never be able to get out of this forest and return home." Gradually, a rustling sound rose from among the trees and bushes. The strange creatures of the forest emerged one by one from behind the trees, bushes, and rocks, gathering around Alice and staring at her. Suddenly, Alice heard a familiar voice from above. She saw the Cheshire Cat sitting on a tree branch, looking at her with his wide grin. Alice said to him sadly, "I want to go home." The cat pointed with its paw at the tree trunk, and suddenly a beautiful wooden door appeared. Alice stepped forward curiously and passed through the door. She had entered the realm of the Queen of Hearts. Suddenly, Alice saw the White Rabbit hurriedly run past her and enter the royal palace. She thought to herself, "Maybe that's why the rabbit is always in such a hurry. He must be there when the queen enters the palace." At that very moment, the sound of trumpets rang out, signaling the queen's arrival. Everyone waited anxiously for her. The White Rabbit shouted loudly, "Great Emperor, the Queen of Hearts is entering!" All the soldiers, who looked like playing cards, clapped and cheered excitedly. Behind the queen, a small man walked slowly. He cleared his throat, and the White Rabbit hurriedly added, "And also the king." Suddenly, the Queen of Hearts spotted Alice and exclaimed in surprise, "A little girl in my palace? Who are you? Where did you come from, and where are you going?" Alice bowed politely and said, "I am Alice, and I am trying to find my way home." The queen shouted angrily, "Your way? All the paths here are mine. There is no path for you." Suddenly, the queen asked, "Do you play croquet?" Alice replied, "Yes, I like this game." When the queen realized that Alice played croquet, she loved this game. She said, "Then we shall play right now." Everyone knew that the queen always won. In fact, the others always played in a way that ensured the queen would win, or else she would become very angry. When they were ready to play, the queen told Alice that she had to use a flamingo as her croquet mallet. Just as the queen was about to take her shot, something strange happened. The Cheshire Cat appeared, but only Alice could see him. The cat said to Alice, "Do you know a fun thing we can do? We can make the queen very angry." Alice said, "Oh no, stop, don't do that." But the Cheshire Cat didn't listen to Alice, and with a quick move, tied up the queen's big poofy skirt. The queen, unaware of what had happened, tried to take a step, but her feet got caught in the tied-up skirt and she lost her balance. The Queen of Hearts fell to the ground, turning completely upside down like a carousel. The Queen stood up angrily. Her face had turned red with rage. She pointed at Alice and shouted, "You did this! Off with her head!" The king said calmly, "Wouldn't it be better to hold a small trial first?" The Queen grumbled angrily, but agreed, saying, "Fine, let's hold a trial." The White Rabbit loudly read out Alice's charge. Alice has made the Queen of Hearts angry. The Queen looked at Alice with a wicked smile and said, "Are you ready to be punished?" Alice said in surprise, "Punished? But first it must be determined whether I am guilty or not." The Queen shouted loudly, "No, punishment first." Then in anger, she commanded, "Off with her head." Suddenly, Alice remembered that she had pieces of the magical mushroom in her pocket. She reached into her pocket, took out the pieces of the mushroom, and immediately ate them. Suddenly, Alice began to grow. She grew so tall that she towered over everyone, becoming like a giant to them. Alice looked at the Queen confidently, who was hiding behind the king in fear, and said loudly, "I'm not afraid of you. You're just a fat, proud, and ill-tempered old woman." Suddenly, Alice felt herself shrinking. The effect of the magical mushroom was wearing off. The Queen, seeing Alice shrinking, regained her courage and shouted loudly again, "Off with her head!" All the soldiers moved toward Alice and formed a circle around her. Alice quickly ran through the soldiers and began to sprint away. The Queen shouted angrily, "Catch her!" and along with all her soldiers and attendants, chased after Alice. As Alice ran, she suddenly saw a door she had previously used to enter Wonderland. She grabbed the doorknob and said, "I must get out of here." The doorknob said in surprise, "But you're already outside." Alice was confused. She bent down and looked through the keyhole. She saw herself on the other side of the door, lying on the grass, the same spot where she had been sitting with her sister, reading history. Alice's sister's voice woke her up. "Alice, wake up! It's tea time!" Alice awoke and sleepily looked around. There was no sign of Wonderland or its angry queen. They had all been just a dream. Alice smiled and got up. The weather was sunny and beautiful, a lovely day that shouldn't be ruined by nonsense.